The council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Collective placed the ancient stone tablet on the crystalline table. The artifact hummed with energy that made the air shimmer around it, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled delegates from 12 different species. Each representative leaned forward, their various forms of eyes, sensors, and perception organs focused intently on the mysterious relic. This, Kethvar announced, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture of significance, is the Codex of Eternal Wisdom. It was discovered in the ruins of the predecessor civilization on the dead world of Terminus Prime. According to our xenoarchaeologists, it contains the location of the Great Library, a repository of knowledge that predates our entire galactic civilization by millions of years. Dr. Sarah Chun, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, studied the tablet with fascination. Unlike her colleagues who relied on advanced scanning equipment and neural interfaces, she simply observed it with her natural human eyes. The script carved into the stone seemed to flow and shift as if the very act of observation changed its meaning. Ancient symbols danced across the surface, some appearing familiar while others defied comprehension entirely. The problem, continued Kethvar, is that none of our most advanced linguistic algorithms can decode it. The Valdorian quantum computers have failed. The crystalline hive mind's collective processing power proved insufficient. Even the ethereal ones, with their ability to perceive thoughts directly, cannot penetrate its mysteries. His voice carried the weight of frustration that had built up over months of failed attempts. The Valdorian representative, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical shell, spoke with a voice like grinding metal. Our computational matrices have processed every known language pattern in the galaxy. This script follows no logical progression, no mathematical sequence we can identify. It is as if the very symbols resist technological interpretation. Admiral Thex of the Draconian Empire, her scaled features twisted in a scowl, slammed a clawed fist on the table. Perhaps it is meant to remain hidden. Some knowledge should stay buried. This obsession with ancient secrets will lead to nothing but trouble. Spoken like a true warrior, chirped the avian delegate, her feathers rustling with amusement. But consider the possibilities. The predecessors were the most advanced civilization known to have existed. Their technology could solve the energy crisis in the outer systems, cure the plague affecting the Centauri colonies, or even unlock faster-than-light communication across galactic distances. Dr. Chun remained quiet during the debate, her fingers tracing patterns in the air as she mentally cataloged the symbols she could see. Something about them tugged at her memory, like a half-remembered song or a word on the tip of her tongue. While the other delegates argued about the potential dangers and benefits of unlocking the codex, she found herself drawn into the rhythmic flow of the ancient script. The ethereal representative, a being of shifting mist and starlight, finally spoke in a voice like wind chimes. We have sensed something unusual about this artifact. It seems to respond not to technology or psychic probing, but to something far more primitive, something organic and intuitive. Impossible, declared the Valdorian. All language is mathematical at its core. All communication follows patterns that can be decoded through proper analysis. Yet here we sit, Kethvar observed, after 6 months of analysis with no progress. Perhaps it is time to consider alternative approaches. Dr. Chun finally looked up from the tablet, her brown eyes thoughtful. May I examine it more closely? She asked, her voice cutting through the rising tension in the room. Several delegates laughed, the sounds ranging from mechanical whirring to harmonic resonances. The Draconian Admiral's laugh was particularly harsh. The human thinks she can succeed where our greatest minds have failed. Your species hasn't even mastered quantum consciousness yet. Humor the primitive, I say, added the crystalline representative, its faceted head refracting light in patterns that indicated amusement. Let her embarrass herself publicly. It will be instructive for the newer council members to observe the limitations of biological cognition. But Kethvar raised a hand for silence. Dr. Chun has proven herself valuable to this council on numerous occasions. Her species may lack our technological sophistication, but they have shown remarkable problem-solving abilities in unconventional situations. He gestured toward the tablet. Please, proceed with your examination. Sarah approached the artifact slowly, aware that every sensor and recording device in the chamber was focused on her. The tablet seemed to grow warmer as she drew near, and the symbols appeared to pulse with a soft, organic rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. She knelt beside it, bringing her face close to the ancient stone. The other delegates watched with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity as she began to trace the symbols with her finger, not quite touching the surface, but following their contours through the air. Her lips moved silently, as if she were reading, though no sound emerged. Minutes passed. The chamber remained eerily quiet except for the subtle hum of life support systems and the occasional mechanical adjustment from the artificial delegates. Sarah's breathing grew deeper, more rhythmic, as if she were falling into a meditative state. Suddenly, she sat back on her heels and looked up at the assembled council. "I can't read it yet," she said simply, "but I think I understand why your systems are failing." The Valdorian delegates mechanical form word with processing sounds. Elaborate. "This isn't just a language," Sarah explained, standing and addressing the council. "It's a test." The predecessors weren't just recording information. They were creating a challenge that could only be solved by a specific type of intelligence. One that combines pattern recognition with intuitive leaps, logical analysis with emotional understanding. "Preposterous," snorted Admiral Thex. "Knowledge is knowledge. Information is information. There are no magical requirements for accessing data." "But what if there are?" Sarah countered. "What if the predecessors deliberately designed this to filter out purely technological approaches? What if they wanted to ensure that only beings capable of growth, of learning, of genuine understanding could access their greatest secrets?" The ethereal delegates' misty form shimmered with interest. "Continue this line of reasoning, human." "Every translation attempt has focused on the symbols themselves," Sarah explained, beginning to pace as her excitement grew. "But what if the real message isn't in the individual symbols? What if it's in the relationship between them, the spaces, the rhythm, the flow? What if it's designed to be understood not by computers, but by minds?" She turned back to the tablet, her voice growing more confident. "I need time to study this properly, not with scanners or algorithms, but with the one tool that every advanced civilization eventually abandons. Pure human intuition combined with methodical observation." Kethvar leaned forward. "How much time?" "Give me 3 days," Sarah said. 72 hours alone with the tablet. "No technological assistance, no quantum processors, no psychic probing. Just me, the artifact, and the basic tools that my species use to decode every other language we've ever encountered." The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates argued that it was a waste of time, that primitive methods could never succeed where advanced technology had failed. Others wondered if perhaps that was exactly the point. Finally, Kethvar called for order. "Dr. Chin's request is reasonable. The council grants you 72 hours for your examination. But be aware, if you succeed where we have failed, it will challenge everything we believe about the nature of intelligence and understanding." Sarah smiled, an expression that seemed to puzzle several of the non-human delegates. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," she said quietly, her gaze returning to the mysterious script that seemed to pulse with ancient secrets waiting to be unlocked. The isolation chamber hummed quietly around Dr. Sarah Chun as she sat cross-legged on the floor, the Codex of Eternal Wisdom resting on a simple wooden table before her. The council had provided her with the most basic amenities: water, food, simple furniture, and, most importantly, complete isolation from all technological interference. No quantum computers, no neural interfaces, no scanning equipment of any kind. Just Sarah, the ancient tablet, and the tools she had requested: paper, pencils, and a magnifying glass. 18 hours had passed since the chamber doors had sealed. Sarah had spent the first few hours simply observing, letting her eyes adjust to the subtle variations in the stone's surface. The symbol seemed almost alive in the dim lighting, shifting and changing as shadows moved across their carved surfaces. What had initially appeared to be random markings now revealed themselves as carefully crafted patterns. She had covered dozens of sheets of paper with rough sketches, trying to capture not just the symbols themselves, but their relationships to each other. Some characters appeared in clusters, others stood alone. Some were deeply carved, while others were barely visible impressions in the stone. The spacing between symbols varied in what seemed like a musical rhythm, sometimes tight and urgent, sometimes flowing with generous gaps. "Okay," she murmured to herself, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of focused work. "What do I know about you?" The tablet remained silent, but Sarah had learned to read its moods. The surface temperature fluctuated in patterns that seemed to correspond with her level of attention. When she focused intently on specific sections, the stone grew warmer. When her mind wandered, it cooled. It was as if the artifact was somehow aware of her mental state. She picked up her latest sketch and compared it to the original. Her drawings were crude by technological standards, but they captured something that the most advanced scanners had missed: the emotional flow of the script. Some sections felt urgent, others contemplative. Some symbols seemed to pulse with energy, while others radiated calm. "You're not just information, are you?" she whispered to the tablet. "You're a conversation, a dialogue waiting for someone to participate." Sarah stood and began to pace around the table, viewing the tablet from different angles. The overhead lighting cast shadows that revealed new details with each step. From a north side, certain symbols seemed to connect in ways that were invisible from other positions. From the south, different patterns emerged. She grabbed her pencil and began sketching rapidly, trying to capture these perspective-dependent revelations. The symbols weren't just arranged in a linear fashion like most written languages. They existed in a three-dimensional relationship with each other. The carved depth, the viewing angle, the interplay of light and shadow all contributed to the meaning. "Dimensional language," she breathed, excitement rising in her voice. "You're not meant to be read flat. You're meant to be experienced in space." For the next 6 hours, Sarah worked feverishly, creating sketches from every conceivable angle. She noticed that certain symbol combinations only made sense when viewed from specific positions, as if the predecessors had embedded multiple layers of meaning into the same physical space. But understanding the structure was only the beginning. She still needed to decode the actual content. As her second day in isolation progressed, Sarah began to notice something else. The symbols weren't just visual. They were triggering memories, emotions, half-formed thoughts that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her conscious mind. When she focused on a particular sequence, she might suddenly remember a childhood lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Another grouping would bring to mind the feeling of watching a sunset over the ocean. Emotional resonance, she realized, scribbling notes frantically. "You're not just communicating with my intellect. You're speaking to something deeper." She began cataloging these emotional responses, creating what she privately called a feeling map of the tablet. Certain areas evoked wonder and curiosity. Others triggered caution or fear. Some sections filled her with a profound sense of loss and longing, as if she were remembering something precious that had been lost. By the middle of her second day, a pattern was beginning to emerge. The emotional responses weren't random. They were telling a story, a narrative that bypassed logical language entirely and spoke directly to the human heart. The story began with wonder, symbols that evoked the feeling of looking up at the stars for the first time. It progressed through discovery, growth, and achievement. But then came darker emotions: pride, conflict, and devastating loss. The final sections radiated a complex mixture of hope and warning, as if the predecessors were trying to pass on both their greatest treasures and their most bitter lessons. Sarah found herself crying without knowing exactly why. The tablet wasn't just telling the story of an ancient civilization. It was sharing their emotional journey, their triumphs, and tragedies, their hopes for those who would come after. "You're not a codex," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're a confession, a final message from a dying race." As her understanding deepened, individual symbols began to make sense, not as abstract characters in an alien alphabet, but as emotional concepts given visual form. A spiral represented growth and change. Overlapping circles symbolized connection and unity. Jagged lines conveyed conflict and division. But there was more. The symbols seemed to be responding to her growing understanding, becoming clearer and more defined as her comprehension increased. It was as if the tablet was alive, awakening to her presence, and gradually revealing its secrets to someone finally capable of understanding. By the end of her second day, Sarah had filled nearly 100 pages with notes, sketches, and emotional impressions. She was beginning to see the overall structure of the message, though many details remained unclear. The predecessors had indeed left behind directions to their great library, but they had embedded those directions within a much larger communication, a final testament to their civilization and a warning for those who would follow. The tablet grew noticeably warmer as she worked, and the symbols seemed to pulse with increasing brightness. Whatever intelligence or consciousness the predecessors had embedded in this artifact, it was responding to her efforts with something that could only be described as approval. As she prepared for her final day of isolation, Sarah knew she was on the verge of a breakthrough. The ancient script was yielding its secrets, not to technology or force, but to patience, intuition, and the uniquely human ability to connect with others across the vast gulfs of time and space. But she also sensed that the most challenging part lay ahead. Understanding the emotional content was one thing. Translating that understanding into actionable information that the Galactic Council could use was something else entirely. The predecessors had hidden their greatest secret within layers of meaning that required not just intelligence, but wisdom. And tomorrow, she would discover whether humanity possessed enough of both to unlock the greatest treasure in the galaxy. The third day dawned with Sarah Chun feeling as though she had spent the night in communion with ghosts. Her dreams had been filled with alien vistas and beings of impossible beauty, their forms shifting between familiar and strange. She woke with tears on her cheeks and words in an unknown language on her lips, words that faded like mist the moment she tried to focus on them. The tablet seemed different in the morning light. Where before it had been merely responsive, now it felt almost eager, as if it too had been waiting through the long night for this final day of discovery. The symbols appeared sharper, more defined, and Sarah could swear she saw new details that hadn't been visible before. She approached the table with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. Her notes from the previous 2 days surrounded the artifact like an archaeological dig, layer upon layer of understanding built up through patient observation and intuitive leaps. But today felt different. Today she sensed she would either achieve complete understanding or fail entirely. Sarah placed her hands on either side of the tablet, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the ancient stone. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift, allowing the emotional resonances to wash over her without trying to analyze or categorize them. In that meditative state, something extraordinary happened. The boundaries between her consciousness and the tablet began to blur. She found herself experiencing not just emotions, but memories that weren't her own. Visions of the predecessors themselves began to form in her mind. Tall, graceful beings with an almost human appearance, but possessed of an otherworldly dignity that spoke of millennia of accumulated wisdom. She saw their civilization at its height, crystal cities that defied gravity, reaching toward the stars like frozen music. She witnessed their technological marvels, their artistic achievements, their philosophical insights. But she also experienced their growing isolation, their gradual disconnection from the very emotions and instincts that had driven their early growth. The predecessors, she realized, had achieved everything that the current galactic civilizations aspired to. They had transcended biological limitations, conquered death, mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. But in doing so, they had lost something essential: the spark of organic curiosity, the messy unpredictability of emotional intelligence, the ability to grow and change through struggle and conflict. "You became perfect," Sarah whispered, her eyes still closed. "And perfection was your death sentence." The visions intensified. She saw the final days of the predecessor civilization, not destroyed by war or catastrophe, but simply fading away as beings who had achieved everything gradually lost the will to continue. They had solved every problem, answered every question, removed every source of uncertainty and challenge from their existence. And in doing so, they had removed the very reasons for existing. But some among them had understood. A small group of predecessors had recognized what was happening to their race and had dedicated their final centuries to creating a warning, a message that could only be understood by beings still struggling, still growing, still driven by the chaotic energy of unresolved potential. The tablet was that message, but it was more than just a warning. It was a test designed to identify species that possessed the crucial balance between technological advancement and emotional vitality. The predecessors wanted to share their knowledge, but only with races that could handle it without suffering the same fate. Sarah opened her eyes and found that the symbols on the tablet had completely transformed. What had once appeared as alien script now revealed itself as a complex multidimensional map, not just to the location of the Great Library, but to the spiritual and philosophical requirements for accessing its contents safely. The physical coordinates were embedded within the emotional narrative, hidden in the interplay between symbol and feeling. As Sarah traced the patterns with her finger, she began to see stellar coordinates expressed through the geometric relationships between character groupings. The location of the Great Library slowly emerged from the chaos of ancient script like a constellation becoming visible through clearing clouds. But the predecessors had been cunning. The coordinates were incomplete without understanding the deeper meaning of the message. The final piece of the puzzle required the reader to demonstrate not just intelligence, but wisdom, the ability to recognize when knowledge might be dangerous, and to proceed with appropriate caution. Sarah found herself facing a choice that she realized was the ultimate test. The tablet was offering her two sets of coordinates. The first led to the Great Library itself, a repository of predecessor technology and knowledge that could advance any civilization by millions of years in a matter of decades. The second led to what the predecessors called the Garden of Possibilities, a place where their final experiments in consciousness and reality manipulation were stored. The library represented safe knowledge, advanced but comprehensible technology that could benefit galactic civilization without fundamentally changing its nature. The garden represented dangerous knowledge, insights into the fundamental nature of reality that could either elevate a species to godhood or destroy them entirely. The choice had to be made by an individual consciousness, not a committee or a computer system. It required the kind of moral intuition that could only come from a being still connected to their emotional core, still capable of growth and change. Sarah realized that this was why none of the Council's technological approaches had succeeded. The tablet wasn't designed to yield its secrets to artificial intelligence or purely logical analysis. It required the touch of a mind that could understand not just information, but meaning, not just facts, but consequences. As the implications of her discovery sank in, Sarah understood why the predecessors had chosen this method of concealment. They had seen the future, civilizations that would achieve great technological prowess, but might lack the emotional and spiritual maturity to handle ultimate knowledge responsibly. The test wasn't just about reading an ancient script. It was about proving that her species, that humanity, possessed the wisdom to know when knowledge should be shared and when it should remain hidden. Sarah looked at her notes, at the hundreds of sketches and emotional impressions she had recorded over the past 3 days. The answer had been there all along, encoded not just in the symbols, but in her own journey of understanding. The predecessors hadn't just left coordinates. They had left a mirror, a reflection of what any species seeking their knowledge would need to become. The question now was whether humanity was ready for that reflection. And, more importantly, whether Sarah was prepared to make a choice that would affect not just her own species, but the entire galactic community. The tablet pulsed with warm energy, waiting for her decision. In a few hours, the isolation chamber would open, and she would need to report her findings to the council. But first, she had to decide what those findings would be. The fate of galactic civilization rested on a choice between safety and transcendence, between gradual progress and revolutionary transformation. And somehow the responsibility for that choice had fallen to one human woman with nothing but intuition, empathy, and 3 days of patient observation to guide her. The final hours in the isolation chamber passed like a meditation on the nature of responsibility. Sarah Chun sat before the tablet, her decision made, but her heart heavy with the implications. She had decoded the predecessor message completely, understood both its warning and its offer, and chosen the path that her conscience demanded. But implementing that choice would require skills she had never needed before: diplomacy, manipulation, and the kind of strategic thinking that could convince a council of advanced alien civilizations to accept guidance from what they considered a primitive species. When the chamber doors finally opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, Sarah emerged carrying only a single sheet of paper covered with what appeared to be crude sketches and notations. The waiting council delegates gathered around her with expressions ranging from eager anticipation to barely concealed skepticism. Ambassador HFY War stepped forward first, his forearms spread in a gesture of welcome. Dr. Chun, the entire galaxy awaits your report. Were you successful in decoding the predecessor script? Sarah looked around the assembled delegates, studying each alien face and form. She had learned to read their expressions over her years on the council, and she could see the mixture of hope and doubt in their various features. The Valdorian's mechanical shell hummed with barely contained processing power, ready to analyze whatever she reported. Admiral Thex's scaled features bore their usual scowl of military impatience. The ethereal representative shimmered with curiosity, while the crystalline delegate refracted light in patterns that indicated intense focus. "I was successful," Sarah said simply, holding up her sheet of notes. "The script has been decoded." The chamber erupted in excited chatter as delegates turned to each other with expressions of amazement. The Valdorian representative's voice cut through the noise like grinding metal. "Impossible. Our quantum analysis systems processed every conceivable linguistic pattern. How could primitive methods succeed where our technology failed?" Sarah had prepared for this question, because the predecessors didn't design their message for technological analysis. They created something that could only be understood through organic intuition combined with emotional intelligence. Your systems failed because they were looking for logical patterns in what is essentially an artistic expression. Artistic expression? The crystalline delegate's faceted head tilted in confusion. "We were told this contained scientific coordinates to the Great Library." "It does," Sarah confirmed. "But those coordinates are embedded within a much larger communication, a final message from a dying civilization about the nature of knowledge and responsibility." She moved to the central display table and spread out her hand-drawn notes. To the assembled delegates, they looked like the crude scratchings of a primitive mind. Simple sketches, emotional notations, rough approximations of the complex symbols they had been studying for months. "The predecessors weren't just advanced technologically," Sarah began, launching into the explanation she had carefully crafted. "They were also profoundly wise. They understood that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and they designed their message accordingly." Admiral Thex leaned forward, her claws clicking against the table surface. "Enough philosophy. Where's the library?" Sarah pointed to a section of her notes where she had sketched a rough star map. The coordinates are encoded here in the relationship between symbol clusters and their emotional resonances. But there's something you need to understand first. She paused, meeting the gaze of each delegate in turn. The predecessors left us a choice. The coordinates I've decoded don't lead to one location. They lead to two. The chamber fell silent. Kethvar's expression grew grave. Explain. The first location is what they called the Sanctuary of Gradual Wisdom, Sarah continued, using terms she had invented to convey concepts that had no direct translation. It contains technology and knowledge that is advanced but comprehensible, improvements to our existing sciences that could benefit all our civilizations over time. The avian delegate's feathers rustled with interest. And the second location? Sarah took a deep breath. They called it the Nexus of Infinite Potential. It contains knowledge that could transform us into something beyond our current understanding, but at the cost of losing what we currently are. Transformation sounds promising, said the ethereal representative, its misty form shimmering with excitement. We have always sought to transcend our current limitations. That's exactly what destroyed them, Sarah replied firmly. The predecessors achieved ultimate knowledge and ultimate power. They transcended every limitation, solved every problem, answered every question. And in doing so, they lost the very qualities that made existence meaningful: curiosity, growth, the struggle to understand and improve. She gestured toward the tablet, which continued to pulse with its subtle energy. This isn't just a map to their treasures. It's a warning about the price of perfection. They're offering us the same choice they faced: gradual advancement or immediate transcendence. They chose transcendence and faded into oblivion. The Valdorian delegate processed this information with audible mechanical whirring. You are suggesting we deliberately choose limited knowledge over unlimited potential? I'm suggesting we choose wisdom over raw power, Sarah corrected. The predecessors learned too late that some prices are too high to pay. They're giving us the chance to learn from their mistakes. Admiral Thex stood abruptly, her imposing form radiating frustration. This is absurd. You expect us to turn away from the greatest discovery in galactic history because of vague warnings about philosophical consequences. Not turn away, Sarah replied calmly. Choose carefully. The sanctuary coordinates are clearly marked in my notes. The knowledge there could advance our civilizations by thousands of years while allowing us to remain essentially ourselves. Isn't that enough? And the other coordinates? Asked Kethvar quietly. The ones leading to unlimited knowledge. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I've chosen not to decode those completely. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The predecessors trusted whoever decoded their message to make that choice responsibly. The chamber exploded in debate. Some delegates accused Sarah of withholding crucial information. Others argued that her decision showed admirable caution. The ethereal representative suggested that the choice should be put to a galactic vote, while Admiral Thex demanded immediate access to all decoded information. Through it all, Sarah remained calm, watching the passionate arguments with the detachment of someone who had already wrestled with these questions and reached a decision. She had known this moment would come, the point where her choice would be challenged by beings whose technological superiority had never been questioned by limitations of wisdom or restraint. Finally, Kethvar called for order. Dr. Chun, you understand that you are asking us to accept the judgment of a species that has barely achieved interstellar travel? Your recommendation to limit our access to predecessor knowledge could be seen as an attempt to maintain human relevance in a galaxy where your species is technologically inferior. Sarah had been waiting for this accusation. You're right that humanity is technologically inferior to everyone in this room, she admitted. But perhaps that's exactly why we were able to decode a message that all of your advanced systems missed. The predecessors didn't design their test for the most advanced minds. They designed it for minds still capable of growth. She stood and walked around the table, addressing each delegate directly. Every species in this chamber has achieved remarkable technological advancement. But When was the last time any of you faced a problem that couldn't be solved with more processing power, more quantum analysis, more technological sophistication? When was the last time you had to rely on intuition, emotion, or simple patience? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the delegates considering her words, perhaps recognizing truths they had been reluctant to acknowledge. The predecessors chose to embed their greatest secret in a puzzle that could only be solved by organic intelligence, she continued. They were looking for species still connected to their emotional cores, still capable of making choices based on wisdom rather than pure logic. They were looking for beings who could understand that some knowledge comes with responsibilities that no amount of technological advancement can prepare you for. She returned to her seat, her voice dropping to a quieter, more intimate tone. I'm not asking you to accept human judgment because we're superior. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, sometimes, the most primitive approach is also the wisest one. 6 months after the Council's decision to follow Sarah's recommendations and pursue only the sanctuary of gradual wisdom, the first expedition returned with discoveries that transformed galactic civilization in ways both profound and subtle. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the research station orbiting the predecessor sanctuary world, watching as teams of scientists from a dozen species worked together to understand technologies that would have seemed like magic just a year before. The knowledge they had found was exactly as the ancient message had promised, advanced beyond their current understanding, but comprehensible with patience and study. Medical advances that could extend lifespans across all species without the existential emptiness that had plagued the predecessors. Energy systems that could power entire star systems while maintaining the natural rhythms of exploration and discovery that drove civilizational growth. Communication technologies that enhanced understanding between species without erasing the beautiful diversity of thought that made the galaxy vibrant. Remarkable, said Ambassador Kethvar, joining Sarah at the observation window. His 4 arms were folded in a gesture of contemplative satisfaction. The humans were right. This gradual approach has given us advances we could never have achieved through our own research, while allowing us to remain ourselves. Sarah smiled, though her expression carried a note of wistful sadness. It wasn't just humans who were right. It was the wisdom of beings who learned from their own mistakes. The predecessors paid the ultimate price to leave us this choice. Through the transparent aluminum, they could see the Valdorian representative working alongside crystalline researchers and avian engineers, their different approaches to problem-solving creating synergies that none could have achieved alone. The gradual integration of predecessor knowledge was fostering unprecedented cooperation between species that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or indifference. There have been questions, Kethvar said carefully. Some delegates still wonder about the other coordinates, the ones you chose not to decode fully. Sarah had been expecting this conversation for months. The nexus of infinite potential, she said quietly. Yes, I still have those coordinates. And every day I question whether I made the right choice. You could decode them now, Kethvar suggested. With all we've learned from a sanctuary, perhaps we would be better prepared to handle unlimited knowledge. Sarah turned from the window to face him directly. That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed the predecessors. There's always a reason why now is the right time for more power, more knowledge, more capability. The trap isn't in the seeking. It's in believing you're wise enough to handle everything you might find. She walked to a nearby console and pulled up the holographic display of the tablet's decoded message. Even translated into standard galactic script, the emotional resonances of the original remained somehow present, like echoes of the predecessor's final desperate attempt to share their hard-won wisdom. I've been thinking about something, Sarah continued. The predecessors didn't just give us coordinates to 2 locations. They gave us a choice that we'll face again and again as we grow and develop. Every major advance, every new discovery, every leap forward will come with the same question. Do we take what we can safely handle, or do we reach for everything we can possibly grasp? Kethvar's expression grew thoughtful. You believe this was not a single decision, but the first of many. I know it was, Sarah replied, because I've already faced it again. 3 times in the past 6 months, my research into the sanctuary knowledge has led me to insights that could unlock more of the Nexus coordinates. Each time, I've had to choose whether to pursue that knowledge or set it aside. The revelation clearly startled Kethvar. You found additional information? The council should be informed, should it? Sarah interrupted gently. Or should some decisions be made by individuals who have to live with the consequences? The predecessors designed their test for a single consciousness, not a committee. Maybe that was intentional. She gestured toward the bustling research activity visible through the observation deck. Look at what we've accomplished with just a fraction of predecessor knowledge. Diseases that have plagued your people for millennia are being cured. Energy shortages that threatened to destabilize entire sectors have been resolved. Our ships can now travel between galaxies in reasonable time frames. And yet you argue for continued restraint. I argue for continued choice, Sarah corrected. The predecessors didn't fail because they gained too much knowledge. They failed because they stopped choosing, stopped questioning whether each new capability was worth its cost. They automated their decision-making, removed uncertainty and struggle from their existence, and in doing so, removed the very experiences that give life meaning. Kethvar was quiet for several minutes, processing her words. Finally, he spoke again. The Council has been discussing your role in these discoveries. There are those who believe humanity should be granted a permanent seat on the High Council, given unprecedented authority in decisions regarding predecessor knowledge. Sarah laughed, a sound that contained more sadness than joy. That would be exactly the wrong lesson to learn from this experience. The moment any species, including humanity, believes they're uniquely qualified to make these choices for others, we've started down the same path that destroyed the predecessors. Then, what do you recommend? Sarah returned to the window, watching a team of young researchers from multiple species work together on deciphering a piece of predecessor technology. Their enthusiasm and careful collaboration reminded her of why the gradual approach had been the right choice. I recommend we establish a tradition, she said finally. Every major decision about predecessor knowledge should be made by individuals, not councils or committees or computer systems. And those individuals should be chosen not for their technological expertise or political authority, but for their ability to understand the emotional and spiritual implications of their choices. A council of wisdom rather than a council of power? Something like that. Rotating membership, limited terms, individuals chosen for their ability to say no when necessary rather than their ability to achieve whatever they desire. Sarah paused, then added with a slight smile, and absolutely no technological augmentation allowed. The choices need to be made by beings still connected to their organic limitations. Through the observation deck speakers came the excited chatter of researchers making a breakthrough in understanding predecessor quantum mechanics. The sound was full of joy, discovery, and the messy enthusiasm of beings still growing and learning. The predecessors gave us more than coordinates, Sarah said, listening to the celebration below. They gave us a mirror that shows us what we could become, both the glorious possibilities and the terrible dangers. Every choice we make about their knowledge is really a choice about who we want to be. Kethvar nodded slowly. And you believe we're choosing correctly? Sarah placed her hand against the cool surface of the observation window. Below them, the research teams had formed a spontaneous celebration, members of different species sharing their excitement in ways that transcended language barriers. It was chaotic, inefficient, and absolutely beautiful. I believe we're choosing to remain ourselves while becoming more than we were, she said. And I think that's exactly what the predecessors were hoping for. As if in response to her words, the tablet in her quarters, carefully stored but never forgotten, pulsed once with warm energy. Whether it was coincidence or something more, Sarah chose to interpret it as approval from voices across the vast span of time and space. The greatest challenge hadn't been reading the ancient script. It had been learning when to stop reading and start living the wisdom it contained. And in that most human of capabilities, knowing when enough was enough, lay the secret that would keep galactic civilization growing and thriving for millions of years to come. In the end, the predecessors had been right about one thing above all others. The greatest knowledge wasn't in knowing everything. It was in knowing what not to know and having the wisdom to choose accordingly.